Michael from TrainedParrot.com, and I'm visiting the collections at the Peabody Museum. And this is Daniel Field, who's going to share some of the birds with us.
Yeah, hi, I'm Daniel Field. I'm a doctoral student in paleontology at the Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History, and I study birds. And this is a very cool parrot that we have in the collection. This is the Kakapo, the world's only flightless parrot. Kakapo is endemic to New Zealand, where unfortunately it's not doing very well. It's critically endangered. But here it is in all its glory, the world's heaviest parrot.
Does that one feel heavy?
It actually kind of does.
Oh, wow. So what's in there? What's inside of the specimen?
So this particular specimen is not really representative of how most of the birds are preserved here at the Peabody. So most birds are preserved here as simple study skins, so they're just stuffed with cotton. But this is a full taxidermied mount, so it's posed, its feet are in position to basically be mounted on a wooden perch, and it has beautiful glass eyes in there. So really, for all intents and purposes, this looks like a pretty nice living kakapo, even though it hasn't been alive for a long time. But most of the study skins that we use here for research are just simply preserved with cotton and stored on their back. So yeah, this is a more typical specimen. Another kakapo, but not really preserved quite as aesthetically, but that is the typical way that a research specimen or research skin will be preserved in a natural history museum like this one.
Why is the color and size so different? Is that the preservation?
It probably doesn't have much to do with preservation. It might just have to do with individual variation and potentially also age.
Do you know anything about these feathers up at the front? Are those tactile?
They probably have some sort of tactile function to them. I don't know if it's a specialized feature that helps the kakapo in any way. Although the kakapo is nocturnal, I'm not sure if that might actually help them get around without bumping their heads.
Feeling around and whatnot.
Yeah, but no, I don't actually know the answer to that question.
Cool. And then so we just came back from a trip to New Zealand and Australia.
Oh, no kidding.
We, except for the kakapo, a lot of the other stuff we saw.
Great.
So we're excited to see the Keas. We were
sure.
this far away from them when we were there.
Oh, on the South Island, I guess?
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Well, I mean, we have another nice taxidermied specimen of the Kea here. A pretty lifelike reproduction, but again, we can put that next to a more standard study skin preparation. So, yeah, the plumage of the Kea isn't so striking, except for maybe some of the bright red on the underwing. But the bill is what always draws my eye more than anything. Pretty terrifying looking thing.
Well, from what the farmers in New Zealand told us is that they use that bill to attack a sheep and actually rip out their kidneys and eat their kidneys and then leave them to die. So
They're pretty brutal. I mean, it's amazing. That's unique among parrots. There are close to 400 living species of parrots, and nothing else does that.
Now,
good news for sheep.
So you mentioned that Keas and Kakapos are the most primitive lineage of parrots. Do you have any idea about the age of the divergence?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so describing them as the most primitive living parrots isn't really...
Most basal. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. So they're representatives of a branch that diverges from the rest of parrot life before any other divergences within living parrots. But the age of the ancestral parrot itself is something that's been debated. So there was a fossil discovered and described in the 1990s as a parrot bone, part of a parrot jaw, from the age of dinosaurs, from about 70 million years ago. But there's been controversy about that identification, and most people actually don't think that it belonged to a parrot at all.
There's also DNA evidence that goes back before the KT boundary.
Right, so a lot of that is based on how those molecular sequence analyses are calibrated. So the earliest definitive parrot fossils are roughly 52 million years old, and some of them are in fact known from North America. So in my opinion, it's likely that the divergence between parrots and their closest living relatives, which are songbirds, actually happened more recently than the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. However, that's actually a topic of debate in the ornithological literature at the moment.
What about the fact that parrots are non-migratory birds and you have them on across all continents? It seems that they're and that they came originally from Australia. Australia diverged off before the KT boundary. So how can you explain the widespread of parrots if they never really fly distances anywhere long enough to be able to go across bodies of water?
Right. No, that's an interesting thing to think about. It's true. So the connection between New Zealand and Australia was lost about 86 million years ago. And so that connection has been used as a calibration for those molecular analyses that argue for a very, very ancient divergence of living parrots. So it's true that a lot of the, I suppose you could call them basal lineages of living parrots are found in places like New Zealand and Australia. That's absolutely the case. But in my opinion, the fossil record really argues for a more recent diversification of parrots. So the fact that parrots rarely fly over, say, the distance separating New Zealand and Australia, to me isn't really good evidence that that sort of oceanic crossing couldn't have happened over the last, say, 50 million years. That's a lot of time. Birds like to fly. And I think that most of the evidence at the moment is suggesting that parrots and, in fact, potentially all living birds are actually a lot younger than 86 million years old.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's a great question, though. And there was an influential paper arguing for a very ancient origin of parrots, but basically making that assumption, arguing that the separation of Australia and New Zealand was responsible for the divergence between the group of parrots that includes the Kakapo, the Kea, and the Kaka, and then the Australasian parrots. But I think that basically making that assumption drives the analysis. And there's no definitive evidence, in my opinion, to suggest that the separation between New Zealand and Australia had anything to do with the origin of parrots. I think that took place earlier than even the earliest parrots.
Right. Well, you mentioned the fossil record of parrots, but aren't we talking about like literally a couple bones is the entire fossil record of parrots? So
no, actually, that's surprisingly that's not the case at all. There's some really beautifully preserved specimens of very, very early stem group parrots, including from a place called the Green River Formation in western North America. Mm-hmm. And some of these animals are represented by pretty nice, fairly complete skeletons. However, at that point in early parrot evolutionary history, parrots didn't really look much like parrots. And so the heads of these animals didn't have the classic parrot bill. They look more like kind of generalized arboreal birds. But other clues in terms of the osteology of these animals, including in the hind limb, are pretty strong evidence that these animals, despite not necessarily looking like modern parrots, are nonetheless very early relatives of parrots.
About the hind limb, if the bones are preserved, can you actually tell the zygodactyl feet apart from the normal bird foot, or just the bones are just going to be laying separate even if you find all four digits?
Right, yeah, so depending on the structure of the tarsometatarsus, it can be possible to identify zygodactyl birds just from looking at the tarsometatarsus and the trochleae that basically connect the tarsometatarsus or the foot to the toes. So it seems that zygodactyly is something that has evolved multiple times across birds, across the living avian tree of life, and the origins of zygodactyly in many of those lineages can be picked up in the fossil record by studying the tarsometatarsus.
It's amazing. Actually, as a side note, but this toe on the parrots, I don't know if you've handled a parrot in your hands, but you can bend it forward and it positions just like a pigeon toe. So it's like cartilage. It's a very soft joint. So these toes, you can't bend them back, whereas this toe, you can bend it forward and you can see where it evolves from.
So they're basically facultatively
it's more like if you bust a joint, so you could bend your thumb back and then keep it there, rather than a entirely different thing. That's why I say that I would imagine it'd be difficult to see it as a in the fossil. That would be easy to see because it's just a matter of which way it's bent, and you could if you killed a bird and you bend the toe forward, and things stiffen up, it could stay there. So that's why it would probably be tough to tell that feature. Like the beaks would be very distinct and obvious if you could find a
Sure, yeah, but nonetheless, the structure of the trochleae on the tarsometatarsus basically lets you determine approximately how flexible some of those joints would be in the foot. So you can make some assumptions about whether a given fossil would have been capable of facultative cyclodactyly or not.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you. Maybe if we look at some Australian parrots.
Of course.
Got New Zealand.
Any preference?
Let's see, rainbow lorikeet and the black cockatoos, because we came back from Australia and we're going to have a lot of footage of them in the wild.
Oh, perfect.
So this will be an interesting bit.
Always happy to look at those. So, those ones are conveniently located in here. So rainbow lorikeets are up here. One of the more beautiful birds in any ornithological research collection, in my opinion.
Yeah. So you have different species of rainbow lorikeets. Different subspecies.
Yeah.
And they look quite different side by side, don't they?
Oh, they really do. So here, why don't I give you this one to hold on to? So the nice thing about the way the collections are arranged here at the Peabody is that when different subspecies exist within a species, they're all basically arranged according to subspecies. So we know that you're holding Trichoglossus hematodius intermedius, and I'm holding Trichoglossus hematodus malucanus.
Very nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's such a vibrant collar on that bird. It's really incredible, isn't it?
Different species just from how different they look.
Yeah, they're pretty incredible plumage differences. That's true.
All right.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at the black red tailed cockatoo.
Okay.
Yep, the second one on that shelf.
Yeah, there we go. Oh. It's a nice specimen.
Yeah.
So here we go. Red-tailed black cockatoo, collected in July 1954.
It's a while ago. So can we take a look at this female and the male side by side, because we looked at them in the
so
wild.
Hold to the male.
Best way to hold it like that. So you could tell the male and the female apart. The males are the only one that got the red. The females have more of a yellow tail and the yellow spots on the head. And differences in the wild, when you get seen in the wild, you hear them crying and screaming. And,
Yeah.
It
can be pretty deafening.
Yeah, a whole different experience here. It's just quiet.
When I saw a flock of the yellow-tailed black cockatoos flying over, I mean, it was just bizarre. There's such enormous black birds, these contrasting yellow tails, and it was a really cool thing to witness. Did you see the glossy black cockatoo?
We just saw a flock fly by.
Okay, yeah.
All right, very cool. Doesn't matter which way it faces?
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
Transition over to African parrots.
Hey, let's take a look at the Bucephalus, like Kitty and Truman.
Any particular species?
Yeah, the Cape Parrot. You got right there.
Oops.
So I have a Cape Parrot like this at home.
Oh, really?
Looks actually the belly it looks quite similar. What happened to the beak? The deterioration on that?
I'm not sure if that's something that would have happened after the specimen was collected, or if that's just what the bird looked like in the wild. A lot of these things are really, really old specimens. It's the great thing about a museum collection like this. They basically get preserved for a long time. But since this one was collected in 1902, a lot could have happened to the bill of that bird.
This one's labeled as Bucephalus robustus swahilicus. So the swahilicus, the gray-headed subspecies, and 401 grams.
It's great that information like that was collected alongside the collection of the specimen back in, 1902, because a lot of those really old historical specimens are just lacking really detailed locality information or information about the condition of the specimen. So knowing what this animal weighed, that's actually important data even now.
Yeah, they even have the location, the Utepa Plateau, 12 miles northeast of Sumbanaga. So they even have the location and the altitude, 2,500 meters.
Yeah, that's great.
A lot of information there. And this one even has, this is pretty unbelievable, I don't know if you could see this, but it has wingtip primary feathers still growing in that didn't finish growing.
Right, it's still in the sheath.
Well, it's just halfway out. The feathers, those wing feather primaries are still growing out.
Very cool, yeah.
It's just this exact size and shape of the guy I have at home, so that's quite interesting.
Very cool, yeah. His ancestor, 113 years ago, amazing.
You don't have any Pachycephalus robustus from Cape of Africa, though, South Africa. The ones that are critically endangered.
So.
Yeah.
No, doesn't look like it.
And then, can we grab a Senegal Parrot? That's, I think, just one below it.
Right here. Yeah, sure.
Right
there. Let's find a nice specimen.
There you go. Here's a Senegal Parrot like Kili. Belly's much yellower and has dark feet, but the head and the wings look pretty similar.
What year was that one collected? Oh, it doesn't have a date on it.
No date on this one. Unknown. Do you have any of the other ones that have more information with that?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, so this one was collected in Senegal in 1924.
1924. Blossom South Atlantic Expedition. 1924, July 24th. Cleveland Museum of Natural History. It's interesting is these African species are very underrepresented in American collections. That's why it's really interesting to see how complete your collection here is.
Yeah, well, I mean, overall, broadly, about 70% of the world's birds are represented in this collection. And so there's a lot of stuff that over the course of the last 100 years has become less common. And museums like this, for that reason, are really important houses of biological diversity.
Yeah. So what kind of research are people going to come here to do with these specimens? What kind of things are they looking at?
Well, with study skins like this, you can basically quantify the actual color of feathers. So you can study things like the evolution of plumage patterns and plumage color. You can take measurements of things like wing length and bill shape. Which can tell you a lot about how those things have actually evolved when you put them in a big comparative context. And oftentimes, specimens like this, which are preserved as skins, are also associated with partial skeletons from the same specimen. And so obviously having skeletons are important for a whole bunch of other important research questions. And for me as a paleontologist, being able to go back to the skeletons of living birds and make comparisons with the fossils that I'm working on is an invaluable thing. So anyway, museum specimens like this can provide all sorts of important natural history information down the line.
That's great. Do you have the skeletons from these guys? Do you save them?
That's a great question. I don't know if these particular specimens have skeletons associated with them. My guess is that they probably won't, but we do have a ton of parrot skeletons if you're interested in looking at those.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well,
take a look at that as well. Here we go. The Foramen Magnum.
Scarlet.
There we go. Unfortunately, can you tell us about the skin preservation issues?
Well, yeah, so for birds in a museum collection like this, typically any sort of pigments or structural colors that confer color to the feathers, that tends to preserve over time very well. But any sort of color in, say, exposed facial skin tends to fade pretty quickly. And so oftentimes when data are being collected after a specimen like this has been collected, features about, or information about what the actual facial skin looked like, what the color was like, and what condition it was in, those are noted down because it's known that that will fade over time in a collection.
Great. And just a green wing. Just below, scroll right here.
Sure. Yeah.
See a lot of damaged beaks. I do wonder if it's if they came that way or if they developed that in storage.
That's a great question. I'm not sure how they would have developed it in storage, but it's possible. That's something I don't know much about. But this is a pretty spectacular bird. I was in a place called Chapada dos Guimarães in Brazil. It's like a big mesa, basically, with these gorgeous red cliffs. And I got there right around sunset. And so there's like beautiful afternoon light shining on these cliffs. and a couple of these incredible green-winged macaws flew by against the cliff. It was just, a pretty magical thing to see.
Amazing, yeah.
Thank you. In fact, where is this one from? This one's from Bolivia. It looks like it was collected in 1956.
Okay, this was great. I think let's take a look at the skeletons, because especially because you're familiar with paleontology, so it's interesting to have that tied together.
Sure.
So.
Well, for a parrot they are.
For a parrot, yeah.
Yeah.
But these aren't fossils. These are just collected bones. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So these are just skeletons. And let's start with Strigops, the Kakapo, which is an important one for a couple of reasons. As we mentioned before, it's the world's only flightless parrot. It's also the world's heaviest parrot. But also it's a representative of a small group of New Zealand parrots that is actually the sister group to all other living parrots. So this group only lives in New Zealand and includes only the Kakapo, the Kea, and the Kaka. So it might not look like much, but this is the femur of the Kakapo, and it's really thick for a bird bone. And it turns out that if you actually take the circumference of this femur, it provides a pretty good estimate of the mass of this animal. And because the Kakapo is one of the heaviest living birds, the circumference of this femur is larger than the circumference of just about any other bird.
In your talk, you talked about being able to tell which birds were flightless and flighted.
Yeah. So it turns out that although the hind limb and the femur are really robust on the Kakapo, it turns out that the shoulder elements of the Kakapo are actually not very robust, because a lot of birds, as they go flightless, basically reduce their investment in a lot of the skeletal elements comprising the flight apparatus. So although it has a large, heavy femur, it actually has a comparatively small, gracile shoulder.
Wow. Do you have the flightless cormorant here too?
We don't have any flightless cormorant skeletons here, but we do at the American Museum in New York. So all of the measurements I took
I assume
of the
that was
flightless
one
cormorant
of the
were in
birds
New
you
York.
had. Yeah.
So this is the shoulder of the Kakapo here. So humans and other mammals basically just have one shoulder bone that the humerus inserts into. It's our scapula or our shoulder blade. And this is the scapula of a bird here. But birds and other reptiles actually have another bone comprising the shoulder joint, and that's the coracoid, which is this bone here. And here you can see them both in articulation. So they create the shoulder joint there, basically where they come together. That's how the humerus of a bird fits in there. And in fact, there's only one group of mammals that actually retains a coracoid bone, and it's the monotremes of Australia. So it's the platypus and the echidnas. So they actually still have a comparatively reptilian shoulder, unlike marsupials and eutherian mammals like ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And now is it just me, but this looks really small compared to that big specimen we had.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. So really, you can take a really big bird and skeletonize it, and it'll fit in a pretty small box. So that's like one truth that you become pretty aware of when you become a skeleton specialist. So this was probably a pretty darn big parrot when it was alive.
The other thing is it's a box full of bones. Would these be most of the bones, or is this just some of them representative?
This to me looks like a complete skeleton. So most of the large bones are arrayed here, and then some of the smaller skeletal elements you can see basically the complete vertebral column. Here you can see the pygostyle, so basically the tail vertebra.
So if you wanted to mount this would be a whole whole Kakapo.
Yeah, it looks
Can
like
we see
it.
the skull just one more time?
Sure.
Thanks. No, maybe I should get there.
So,
There. That's just,
does that work for you?
that's perfect. That's just stunning.
I mean, this is just one of the coolest birds there is in the world.
Thick head.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And of course, one really conspicuous thing about parrots when you watch them feed, right, is that they're capable of moving that upper jaw so freely, which we're not. And so there's that nasofrontal joint right here. So that's the joint along which this hinge joint, that the upper jaw can move freely.
I always think when my birds move their upper beaks, it looks like, you know, when ferries, they open their front to disgorge the cars and everything, and it moves up. That's what it looks like to me. It's looking forward, and the upper beak just rises up.
It's pretty cool, yeah, and it's probably tied in with the ability of these animals to manipulate things with such incredible ease, using only their jaws. And here's the lower jaw. You can see quite a robust element.
Look at that. That's amazing.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Wow. Whole cocktail in a little box.
Yeah. See, I mean, for example, these are the big macaws here, all in one box about the same size.
Well, gee, you know, when you're rubbing the neck of one of these birds, hey, like Rose,
Yeah,
you know,
there's not much in there.
I mean, she's this bird there, and then you get down to the neck, it's like this little tiny
Just to
thing.
give you an idea, I mean, this is a budgie.
Oh, here, we just took a peek in there.
Just in this like teeny tiny little box. A male budgie was a captive specimen brought to the Peabody in October 1973 by Jeff Spendelow.
Somebody asked on the tour if you want any specimens of captive birds. You know, the
Oh,
birds.
I think the answer is yes. So I mean, there's
So you're not like done with everything you might need, and
no. I mean, so the collection's continuously expanding, and that's one way by which the museum can increase its comparative sample of things within a species, and also potentially increase the species spread that it has. So, for example, the museum has a number of agreements with different zoos around the country. And so, for example, the museum was able to acquire a shoebill from the zoo in Dallas that died a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
It was one of the few families not represented in this collection, and now we have a shoebill. So, of course, it doesn't have all of the valuable natural history data that a wild specimen might, but having a shoebill for comparative purposes is really important for a museum like this. And it's such a cool bird.
So it wouldn't matter. So let's say if it were a parrot, but it's, you know, they've been bred to have all different variations and all that. Would that matter?
But that can be interesting from an evolutionary perspective too. The evolution of domestication and artificial selection is a really hot topic in evolutionary biology these days. So it depends on what the specimen is in terms of how valuable it would be. But if anybody has questions, they should get in touch with the collections manager, Christoph, just to find out whether it's something that the museum could use.
Sure, absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't think you would take them, so I'll just email
them
them and tell them,
Yeah, no,
if
I
somebody
think
wanted
it
to
could be
donate body.
Let's go to Nestor at the top.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
No caca. Okay, so
I got really up close and personal with
1983.
Kakapo.
collected by the former collections manager of this collection, Fred Charles Sibley.
That's David Sibley's father.
That's David Sibley's father. And here it is. So here's that, you know, fabulous and very characteristic beak of the Kea.
Now, usually when we see the beaks, they're black. Here it's white.
Right. So the beak, you know, the bones underlying it are bones, but the beak is overlain by keratin, a structure called the ramphotheca. So basically, the black thing that you see when you look at a Kea's beak is basically fingernail.
So they removed it to show the bone underneath.
Yeah, exactly. So that can be removed when the specimen gets skeletonized. Occasionally you'll see specimens in here with the ramphotheca attached, but often it's removed so you can basically look at the bone underneath. And yeah, so anyway.
And what about the stuffed specimens? Do they have the bone inside the beak?
Yeah, so in a study skin or a taxidermied specimen, almost all of the bones from the inside of the specimen are removed. But in order to give the head its shape, the front of the skull is left in there. So obviously when you're preparing a specimen, you don't want any soft tissue in there because that could rot. So muscle and nervous tissue and that sort of thing are removed. So typically an incision is made and basically the skin is pulled off. The wings are snipped sort of at the wrist, so the distalmost wing bones and the distalmost foot bones are still retained in there. As you can see, the feet still have their structure. And then basically only the front part of the skull is retained. So the brain is removed along with basically the torso. Well, here. Yeah, sorry, it was right in front of me. Okay, so do you want the Senegal parrot?
Yeah, Senegal, and you also have the cape.
What's the specific epithet for cape? Do you remember?
Robustus or fuchsicolis.
No, it doesn't look like it. It looks like for Poicephalus we just have Senegalis and Gulielmi. All of which appear to be captive. No, there's one from Cameroon. This one's kind of neat, actually. A lot of the hind limb is in articulation, so you can see the tippyotarsus basically articulating at the ankle with the tarsimetatarsus, which articulates with the digits down there. So, I was doing some museum collections work in Nairobi, Kenya, looking at some fossil birds that they found alongside Australopithecus anamensis, and I was going through the bones trying to identify all of the fossil birds, and there was only one parrot bone in the entire collection of hundreds and hundreds of bones, but it was the tarsimetatarsus of the Poicephalus parrot, and they're pretty easy to identify actually. So.
And it's one of the modern species. They were still.
That's really difficult to say, but the structure of the tarsimetatarsus is pretty conserved across this group.
So. Could I have the skull to take a look at?
So, are you saying that bird was kept in captivity by them? Or
no.
just
So I mean, this is over 4 million years old, but
so
would have occurred in the same habitat. Yeah.
That's the skull of a Senegal Parrot.
Rotate it around.
Not very much in there, but can you see the brain cavity from the inside?
Well, so the basically you can look in through the foramen magnum there. So that, of course, is where the where the spinal cord exits the brain, and you can see this little ball underneath there. That's the occipital condyle, where the skull articulates with the first cervical vertebra. It's a very nice little specimen.
That's amazing. So yeah, this one, the neck is articulated and we connect right up to that.
Yeah.
They have a lot of neck vertebrae.
They do, yeah. Birds, the number of cervical vertebrae or neck vertebrae is really variable across birds, which is not the case in mammals. So mammals with a very long neck, like a giraffe just has very large vertebrae. But something like a heron or a stork or a flamingo with a very, very long neck can basically just pack in more and more vertebrae.
Yeah, so people don't understand. People are always saying when a bird flies into a window, it's broken its neck. It's virtually never broken its neck. What it's done is had concussion bleeding in the brain. The necks are very, very flexible, and they don't break from the smack into the window.
And I mean, the amazing thing about the Hyacinth Macaw, in pretty much any living bird, the sternum is the most prominent bone in the skeleton because it has this very enlarged keel, which allows for powerful flight muscles to attach to it. But in the Hyacinth Macaw, the lower jaw here is just about as big or bigger than the keel, which is really amazing. Why don't we open it up, actually? So we'll fish out. So the lower jaw of that Hyacinth Macaw, can compare that to the keel. Pretty amazing. And here's the rest of the bird.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there. Oops. So the natural history collection here at the Peabody also houses some species that unfortunately have gone extinct in historical times. So here we have the cabinet of extinct birds, where some of the most precious specimens in the collection are held. And that includes one species of parrot, the only species of parrot that was native to North America in historical times. And that's this one here, the Carolina Parakeet, the last representative of the species went extinct in captivity or died in captivity in 1918.
And how old is this specimen?
This particular specimen, let's see if that information is associated with it. It says November 17th, 82, which would mean 1882.
So you got an almost 150-year-old specimen here, and the plumage is actually very bright, fantastic condition.
It really is a nicely preserved specimen. It's just beautiful.
As I've seen everywhere else I've seen these, they were very dull plumage, so this is amazing that they preserved so well.
Yeah. This is what it means to be heartbreakingly beautiful, It's just such a shame.
Yeah. Do you know about how they went extinct and what their last years were like?
Only in broad strokes. I know for a long time they were persecuted because they ate farmers' crops, which is really unfortunate. But and I know that was a large part of it. But I'm not sure. Do you have any more detailed information?
Also, the farmers, these birds were known to mourn that they're dead. So the farmers would catch one or kill or catch one, and then either cage it or lay out the body, and then the rest would come and see the dead one, and then these farmers would ambush them and kill the rest. That's why they made them go extinct so easily, because they would come back for the ones that were previously lost.
It's unfortunate.